So I'm going to be talking about the differences between ESFJs and ISFJs, and I'm going to be doing it through examining the differences in their tertiary and repressed functions, because I think those differences are very interesting. So let's get to it. So the ISFJ has repressed extroverted intuition. And extroverted intuition, when it's not repressed, leads to a lot of ease of expression and an ability to theorize ideas and quickly and on the fly, sort of like I'm doing in this video, or actually exactly like I'm doing in this video. And so when this is repressed in the ISFJ, it leads to a difficulty in articulating, and a difficulty in a sort of aversion to that sort of just theorizing and that stuff that leaves the facts behind. And so when NE is repressed, SI is also dominant, and SI deals with a lot of puts a lot of psychic importance on the sense impressions and stuff like that, and how stuff affects them. And these are also very hard to convert into arguments, and they're sort of like intuitions, just feelings, and stuff that has prominence in the ISFJ's or in the ISJ's psyche. But they're hard to convert into an argument that is demanded by a lot of ENTPs. And then, so both the ISTJs and the ISFJs have this problem with being able to take part in that sort of just not unconnected, but sort of unfact-connected theorizing discussion. But the ISFJ has an increased trouble, not necessarily with articulating, but with being satisfied with what they've said and what the expression of their thoughts, because they have tertiary introverted thinking. And tertiary introverted thinking is always striving to be closer to the subjective idea, pretty perfection oriented. E.g. Da Vinci adding lots of little strokes to the Mona Lisa over the years, and his saying that, once you're an artist who's satisfied with your work, then that's not a good sign. Which is related to Nietzsche's observation about artists, I think, where he's comparing them to the histrionic personality. I don't know whether he uses those words exactly, but he's talking about how that kind of artist is someone who's not really self-critical. That's why they produce so much art. So yeah, that's the ISFJ's tertiary introverted thinking, and more the ISFJ's repressed extroverted intuition. So now I'm going to be talking about the ESFJ's tertiary extroverted intuition. So the ESFJ's tertiary extroverted intuition, like all tertiary functions, there's a sort of tension between valuing the function and repressing the function. Hence it being called the puerile function. It's soaring to the sun like Icarus, and then getting too close, then coming down, being burnt out, and stuff. So, for example, there's Jason Segall, who is someone I think who has very good ESFJ is his type. Very good acquaintance with his extroverted intuition. Researching this video/essay, I was watching a lot of his interviews for the end of the tour, and he's someone who definitely finds it easy to just kind of come into the discussion and express ideas as well, and there's not this sort of theorizing reticence that there is in the ISFJ, that thoroughgoing sort of like systematic, like I want to just be careful with this. And the ESFJ is kind of like, oh yeah, I'll join in the sort of the kaleidoscope fun of this armchair philosophizing. But the ESFJ also represses to a degree extroverted intuition. That's why it's not auxiliary. Ultimately, introverted sensing wins the day. So they don't have sort of the ENTP's frustration with the status quo. their demands for large scale revolution and reinventing the wheel. So to illustrate, there's this Gerald Ford quote where he's criticizing critics for wanting to change Congress all the time without really understanding how Congress works. And this represents the ESFJ's SI tendency to want to be acquainted with the facts a lot more before you get into the theorizing of extroverted intuition, the possibilities of extroverted intuition. So that's the ESFJ's extroverted intuition, and now the ISFJ's introverted thinking. Introverted thinking, a lot of the time, is called the system building function. I still see that on forums and stuff, and I don't think that's very accurate because it doesn't account for TI and STPs at all. I think the system building that's primarily seen in INTPs is a result of TI and SI. So we see these system builders all the time, these INTP philosophical architects, ne plus ultra, which is fun to say. These architects all the time, like Parmenides and Kant and Descartes. Kant's got his whole categories, and Descartes got his whole building up from cogito ergo sum, and using those little sort of axioms to create new axioms, and it's very thoroughgoing, and it's very introverted sensing, like, okay, I'll codify, and then I'll go, and then I'll organize, and then I'll go. So they're credited as the ultimate system builders, and I think since I'm equating TI plus SI to system builders, we also have to consider ISFJs as system builders, but they're sort of a different kind of system builders. They don't like to, as far as I've seen, sort of leave reality and say, like Parmenides, there's no motion. They prefer something that's a little more meaningful and full-bodied, and I think that sort of accounts for a lot of ISFJ's attraction to religion or psychology, or even a more practical philosophy, a la Marcus Aurelius, whose philosophy is very much not like leaving reality into theorizing in these logical steps. It's it's much more of a practical guide, but still sort of a carefully constructed system for having peace of mind amidst lots of turmoil and strife. And so both of these INTPs and ISFJs are, very careful in analyzing and collecting data for their systems, and also, of course, a little hesitant to, completely redo the systems like the ENTPs are, which leads me to the ESFJ's repressed introverted thinking. And this is going to sound a little bit roundabout, all the discussion I'm going to do about ENTPs, but I think will connect in the end. So the ESFJs repress introverted thinking, so they don't have this tendency to cling to or to strive for those subjective ideas. They are much more content to go across these distinctions for connection. So the ENTPs, the ESFJ's strengths stand in contrast to the ISFJ's strengths in terms of system building, in a lot the same way that the ENTP's strengths stand in contrast to the INTP's strengths in terms of system building. So what I mean by that is the ENTPs are not system builders that much because they have repressed introverted sensation, which gives them this sort of creative freedom. I talked about Wolfgang Pauli thinking, okay, well maybe there are psychological factors for quantum mechanics, and Albert Einstein's being very much starkly against this observer-centered quantum mechanics, or just quantum mechanics in general, really. So then there's the ESFJs, and they're not system builders either because they repress introverted thinking. And so instead of giving them a creative freedom, this freedom from these subjective ideas gives them a unitive freedom. And what I mean by that is, like, John Boehner, for example, isn't someone who's concerned with those party lines as much, and he left, he resigned because of all the divisiveness. But he makes these talks with Obama in the, what are they called? Merlot and nicotine talks? I forgot what they're called. Something like red wine and a, nicotine patch or something. But in those talks, he's talking to Obama, and he's crossing party lines, those subjective ideas that divide and splinter, in order to do, big things, is what he says, because he's, as he is fond of repeating, he's a normal guy with a big job. And so this unit of freedom that doesn't divide and create systems is what's the ESFJ's strength, and it also relates to their extroverted intuition again, and I'll make another analogy to ENTPs that'll hopefully make sense in the end. So the ENTPs have this capacity for debate, and they're, kind of, that's the thing in typology communities about ENTPs, and it's often attributed to NE's desire to explore and introverted thinking's desire to examine. But I think one of the things that gets left out of that discussion, not always, but sometimes, is extroverted feelings' influence on ENTPs' want for debate. And I think it gets left out for one reason, because a lot of ENTPs may not even realize it themselves, the influence of extroverted feeling in their desire for debate. And that influence is that when you have an ENTP who's in good acquaintance with his extroverted feeling, debate stops becoming sort of like this Hitchens-esque, destruction of opponents, and it becomes very much a sort of communion with a partner to strive for truth, and it's very much connective, and there's this just Socratic enjoyment of it, which is really cool. And so if you sort of flip that process in the ESFJ, the connection comes first, and then you get the exploration, and the listening. And so this is demonstrated in a quote by Pope Francis. Can't remember it exactly, but he's talking about, you got to listen to each other so you can get new stuff, and he's talking new knowledge, and he's talking about how, the connection comes first, and then that can kind of bring us to a new unity and a new just perspective on reality. And so yeah, that's their extroverted intuition. So that's ESFJs versus ISFJs. It's kind of a long video.